Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of U.S. History Made Plain. I'm a high school history teacher trying to make history as fun and interesting for my students as possible. Okay, so let's talk about it. The 1860 election is coming up and the country is in disarray, okay? Because we don't know what to do about slavery. We don't know if the country's going to be for slavery, going to be against slavery. So the Democrats are scared. They are already scared because they know the Republicans really can win the 1860 election without any votes in the South. And so that's already scary, but they also have been like hinting towards getting rid of slavery altogether, which the Democrats feel would just ruin their economy and just throw everything off. So they are shaking in their boots and they're trying to figure out what to do. The Dems are falling apart because remember, Stephen Douglas was the one who was all for popular sovereignty. And during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Lincoln was able to get him to admit that you cannot have slavery in a place where the laws aren't there. If the local, community is not making laws for slavery, you can't have it there. And the Southern Democrats didn't like that. They felt like that was a direct attack on them and against slavery. So they weren't comfortable with Stephen Douglas being the next president. Other Democrats felt like Stephen Douglas was the only president that they could have who was still a Democrat. Democrats have been in office for a long time at this point. They want to stay in power. They know the Republicans are on the rise. They're on their way. So they're trying to prolong that, stall that out, make that not happen as long as possible. And many felt like Stephen Douglas was the best choice because he was a Democrat, but he also had some Republicans on his side because of popular sovereignty and the fugitive slave law, which he was both for. So the Democrats had their convention in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was their place where they were going to nominate who they were going to have as their representative for the 1860 election. A lot of them wanted Stephen Douglas, but the Southern Democrats and those who backed current President Buchanan blocked it. They were like, nah, we're not gonna let this happen. So they deadlocked a few times and had to end the convention without naming Douglas as the nominee because Southern Democrats weren't having it and the Democratic Party was just falling apart. After the convention in Charleston failed, the Democrats held another convention in Baltimore. At this convention, there were a lot of Democrats who wanted to name Stephen Douglas as their nominee, but you still had the Southern Democrats who did not like that and those who were backing Buchanan. But because they could not decide and it became like a big thing, a lot of the slave state delegates walked out. They just left the nomination. They left the convention. So what that did was because they weren't in the room, it allowed those who stayed in the room to nominate Stephen Douglas. So Stephen Douglas became the nominee for the Democrats who were in the room. But the Southern Democrats were like, nah, we ain't standing for that. They had their own convention in Baltimore as well, where they nominated John C. Breckinridge as their nominee because they did not trust Stephen Douglas and they did not want him to be president. The Southern Democrats convention, their whole thing was we want unrestricted extension of slavery in the territories, and we want to also annex Cuba because Cuba had slavery flourishing there. So they wanted to bring Cuba in to strengthen the slave states and the slave position in America. This division in the Democratic Party didn't do anything but strengthen the Republicans who were already growing in power and growing in strength. So the Republicans knew that they could win the election with only northern states, but if half of the Democrats are voting for Douglas and half are voting for Breckinridge, that is going to help the Republican candidate have a stronger campaign. So the Democrats, Southern Democrats, both agreed they did not want to see Lincoln, this new guy, Lincoln, who has hinted at ending slavery altogether. They didn't want to see him take office. They knew that it was very, very likely that the Republicans would win, but they didn't want Lincoln to win because they felt like Lincoln was going to destroy their economy. And so they said, if Lincoln wins, we need to go ahead and start the discussion of leaving this whole union and making our own nation and doing our own thing because Lincoln ain't gonna care about our economy if he becomes president. So that was the beginning of the talks about secession again, or secession due to the possible election of Lincoln.